You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to The Amber Mac Show. I'm Amber, and we are so excited to launch this new show where we'll talk about tech and more every week. And I'm also really excited to introduce you to my co-host, Jeff MacArthur. We've done many shows together in the past, and Jeff is a big geek, if you don't mind me saying so, Jeff.
I don't mind at all. It's been a long time since we co-hosted Command N, and I'm looking forward to talking about tech with you again. And boy, oh boy, a lot has changed in the years since we were last together doing this. So yeah, it's going to be very exciting and looking forward to the new show.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get right to some of the latest tech headlines.
News feed.
So let's start off with something we've all probably heard about if you're following the news at all. Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. That's been in the news a ton lately because he's been going in and downloading government records en masse with a team of teenagers and 20-somethings. And a lot of it may be one of the biggest databases of personal information in the States because the federal government's the biggest employer. And there's no direction or guardrails around this. In fact, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is suing the government to make Musk stop accessing that data, which seems like a good idea.
I will say that this is really an evolving story because every single day I look at the headlines around DOGE, there is new information coming out. And it really does feel like what they're doing right now, Jeff, is kind of flooding the zone, right? They're trying to cut in so many places that people just don't have the time or the ability to keep up with all of these changes. And so they could be breaking the law along the way. And it's going to come to the point, I would think, that the law will catch up to them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think you get the defense of this, like you say, flooding the zone and stuff like this. To hear Elon Musk, as he put it just the other day, that DOGE, he said, I quote, "In fact, I don't think there's ever been, I don't know a case where an organization has been more transparent than the DOGE organization after these criticisms." At the time he said that, the doge.gov website had 3 lines of text on their website. I checked today, and all the data he's talking about amounted to 14 tweets on the homepage. So this isn't a guy who can be trusted with any of our information, and it is not right for a government to let this happen. In fact, the laws against this, in some sense, were first created in the United States after Watergate, when we had another president 50 years ago who was just not willing to respect the privacy of his citizens.
Well, this is going to be a story we will continue to cover. And in some ways, what we're seeing right now is that all tech headlines are involving Elon Musk. That's been our world for a while. Most recently, what we saw is a bit of a scandal between Elon Musk and Sam Altman from OpenAI. In fact, Hollywood Reporter likened it to the feud between Kendrick and Drake. I might not go that far, but it's worth discussing because they do have some history together. If you don't know a lot about Sam Altman, he is, of course, the CEO of OpenAI, which are the makers of ChatGPT. Now, what is happening with this feud is that Elon Musk basically offered to buy the organization that backs OpenAI. It's a nonprofit. Except the thing is, Jeff, as you probably saw, it's not for sale. And so this is another bullying tactic.
Elon has just today announced that he would drop the lawsuit he has against OpenAI if they were to maintain their status as being a nonprofit only, which is just another case of billionaire bullies using the legal system to try to force people to do something. He's saying that it's wrong for them to be doing this, and yet it seems pretty likely that that is just something he's doing to try to attain some competitive edge and slow down Sam Altman and OpenAI, who are a long way ahead of Elon Musk's AI accomplishments at this point, at least.
Absolutely. So this is something to keep an eye on. I think Sam Altman has been quite frank recently as he gets a dose of the Elon Musk bullying behavior, especially with all the tweets coming at him fast and furiously. So a story that doesn't seem to be slowing down.
Yeah, and I just, in terms of another part of the story, we all saw the DeepSeek AI stuff from China. That's playing into this as well. And the fact that this Chinese company was able to train an AI model at a fraction of the cost of the American AI players, and using less advanced chips than the expensive NVIDIA ones, I think that should be a bit of an awakening that we have to understand. People like Sam Altman and others, when they're able to convince people that it costs, extraordinary amounts of money and extraordinary amounts of energy to have these AI successes, they're partially saying they might think that's true, but it's empowering to them to have to lead over these gigantic budgets. It actually enriches them and their companies. So if a Chinese AI can do it at a fraction of the cost, I think that is a very important message to be sent, that we can't take everything these billionaire tech guys are saying at face value and think that they're the sole savior out there, because for all the downsides about DeepSeek, where I wouldn't want to be using it in terms of information privacy and the connections to China and all that sort of stuff, it's good to have more competitors out there, I think.
Absolutely. So we have been talking about DeepSeek on social media for the past few weeks, and I think people are thinking, "Oh my goodness, it's free. I don't have to pay for it like ChatGPT." But I, like you, would really caution people against using it right now. I think the reality is we just don't know how well your private information or personal information is protected, and also, like you alluded to, there are issues with censorship of information, and
safety too, right?
Yes.
There's some American group did a test on DeepSeek and said it failed every single one of their AI safety things. You could get DeepSeek to tell you how to manufacture a bomb. You could get DeepSeek to tell you how to hack into US government databases. What you couldn't get DeepSeek to do is talk about Tiananmen Square. So that just goes to show that it's obviously something from China. They care about what they care about, but it may not be what we all should be caring about.
Absolutely. And thinking about the role of AI on a global scale, do you want to mention that the AI summit just wrapped in Paris, and a lot went on, a lot of government officials and leaders of countries who spoke there. But do want to say that there was a declaration there that was signed by more than 60 countries, but the US and the UK did not sign that. Not a lot of information about why the US didn't sign. I think we can guess it's because they don't want more regulation. The UK, I should add, I read a little bit more about this. They're more concerned about some of the lack of security details within it. But do want to note that both the UK and the US did not sign that.
Yeah, and when you look at having the US as major player in the world, China not paying much attention to this, as we can see from DeepSeek, it kind of reminds me of the environmental situation, where if you've got China and the US, who are the two biggest polluters in the world by far, if they're not participating in the sort of environmental side of things, on the AI side, if those guys decide to keep going without any guardrails, it's really hard to understand if guardrails would actually be of any use if every other country in the world put them in place. So it's not a great place to be, I would have to say.
So we want to switch gears a little bit. We have about a minute left. I want to talk about Apple Health, because I know you're really excited about this, as am I.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Apple has just announced a new Apple Health study that's a little bit different than the things they've done in the past, where they did really directed studies like for the Apple Heart study and things like that. This is a study that is meant to last 5 years, could go longer, and collect a bunch of data from your devices and from people participating in the study about physical and mental health. And, Apple has a really good track record of making these things work. And they have an ability to reach people that most research studies don't. So that Apple Heart study had 400,000 participants. And your average medical study might have hundreds if they're lucky. So it's pretty exciting to see them continuing to develop these technologies that help people's health and help them get through the day a little more aware of what's going on with their body. That's it for our news feed. But coming up after the break, Amber has a sit-down interview about the rise of misinformation and disinformation and what we can do about it.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Jeff, what do you think about misinformation and disinformation? Are you worried about how much this is growing online?
It's just stunning how much it seems to be growing online, and it's happening, under the power of Trump and Musk and these people who don't care what they say are true. And then obviously overseas, bots and stuff like that from Russia and China. So I don't think we've been at a worse time for that in our history.
I think you're exactly right. Super excited to dive further into this topic. So I had a chance to call up my friend, Timothy Caulfield, who is the author of The Certainty Illusion. And here's what he had to say in our conversation.
Media Matters.
I just finished the book this weekend, Tim, and it is excellent. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Amber, and thanks for reading the book.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to start at the beginning because I thought this sort of was a story in itself with the opening of the book where you say, to science communicators everywhere, thank you, it's been rough. I think I know what that means, but I would love to hear why you wrote that.
Holy cow, it's rougher now than when I wrote that. And that was one of the last things I wrote for the book. Look, communicating, talking about science right now is incredibly difficult on many levels. First of all, it is getting, there's so many issues that touch on science that are getting twisted, that are getting weaponized, that are becoming part of the political discourse, right? So it's become more difficult in that sense. But also, Amber, it's gotten more difficult because of the attacks that the scientific community is facing. Just the hate mail and the trolling and the threats that I receive, that's happening, sort of across the board. So yeah, it's been rough.
Absolutely. It's really, I think, overwhelming for so many people, even beyond the science community, in terms of this world that we live in right now with information overload, but of course also misinformation and disinformation, something you talk about in the book. There's also a phrase that was totally new to me in the book, but I got it right away. I Google, therefore I'm certain. And I wanted to ask you what you mean by that and some of the consequences of that.
Well, at the core of the book, as you know, is this paradox where we have never had so much access to information as we have right now. And also, Amber, we have access to quality information. I think that's important to highlight. People can actually now Google, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet. People can access, primary research. But at the same time, we've never been so misled. We've never embraced so much misinformation. And increasingly, people are certain, and I'm not pointing fingers at individuals. It really is the result of how our information environment is structured right now. So many individuals are believing things that are demonstrably false. So, that sentence, that phrase was really trying to get at that core paradox.
You touched on something that I wanted to expand on a little bit, because a few years ago, I wrote a book to help keep kids safe online. And I wrote it for parents, but I actually highly regret this, because I think one of the things that I forgot in the book is that it's very hard for the average individual to fight against some of this misinformation, disinformation, chaos that we're seeing because of some of the big tech companies, the algorithms. I mean, there are other outside factors. I would love if you could expand on that a little bit, to talk about the fact that, hey, an individual person is in a fight right now that maybe they're not equipped to be in that fight.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And all the available research, and even research that has emerged since I finished the book, supports exactly what you are saying. This sounds grim, but I'm going to say it anyway. Our information environment increasingly is rigged against us. We know the algorithms reward, rage, They reward the spreading of misinformation. Studies consistently show that misinformation spreads faster and further than the truth. And we also know that the chaos in the information environment is making it more difficult to cut through the noise. There is some good news out there. We're starting to learn how we can actually fight back. But for individuals, I think just recognizing the degree to which it's rigged against us, and it's rigged against us to make, as I say in the title of the book, to make us feel certain, even though that certainty might not be there. And it plays to our biases, it plays to our political leanings, it plays to our fears, which helps result in this profound polarization that we find ourselves in now. So in many ways, our information environment has become kind of a worst case scenario. Now, I know that sounds grim. There is lightness in my book, but I think, your point is spot on.
I don't think it's actually grim. I think it's realistic. And I also think it's a call to action for people who are out there trying to spread knowledge. And it brings me to another phrase that you have in your book, which is the knowledge production crisis that exists right now. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, first of all, here. I do think this is a call to action. I totally agree with you. And we can win this fight. It's not going to be easy, but we can win. It's a generational issue that we're all going to have to, really become involved in. And part of it is this knowledge production crisis. And I'll even go further and call it just a knowledge crisis. I'm worried that the foundations of knowledge, how we create science and how we talk about science and how we disseminate science, that's being attacked and being weaponized and twisted. And that's really scary, right? Because if we lose that foundation of evidence, of our systematic ability to acquire knowledge, if that's lost, the lights are going to go out, that candle in the darkness that is science could get extinguished. So we really have to fight to preserve that and to preserve the integrity of scientific inquiry. But even further down the chain, as I argue in the book, how we think about trying to do the right thing for ourselves and our family, that's becoming twisted. I call it the goodness illusion. And the opinions that we seek are also being twisted because they're so valuable, right? You know this very well. As soon as a commodity becomes valuable, it's more likely to be twisted and manipulated. And that's exactly what's happening with knowledge.
When I was going through the book, I was basically nodding in agreement with everything I was reading, and I was so happy to see this in print. One of the things I didn't know anything about, which I was so excited to dive into because it is actually terrifying, is predatory journals. This is something I didn't really know about, and I would love to hear more about this from you. It really is a warning to people about these predatory journals and that they do exist.
Yeah, and this isn't a niche issue. It sounds kind of like inside baseball academic, concern. And it's not, right? It really isn't. So predatory journals it's a massive industry. In fact, since I published the book, another study came out recently that, highlighted, we're talking billions of dollars are spent on these predatory journals. These are low quality journals that are not held to the usual standards of a peer reviewed journal. You can pay to have your articles published in these journals. They look legit. And academics all over the world publish in these journals. And Amber, sometimes they don't realize it's a predatory journal, right? They're a young academic and they get an invitation in their email and they're excited about it. They submit their publication and presto, it's accepted, and they, give this publication the publication fees that can be thousands and thousands of dollars. A really good example of the problem of predatory journals. I have a colleague who I've actually kept in touch with since I wrote the book, named Olivia, and she's a really impressive academic. She has sat on 7 editorial boards in these journals. She has done her own research, and she has also, obviously done a lot of peer reviewing herself for these journals. And the interesting thing about Olivia, I call her Ollie, she's a dog. right? She's a dog. And I think this really highlights how fraudulent these are. And of course, it's a joke that was trying to make a point by an academic in Australia who was really trying to make a point about how incredibly, these journals have no standards, to the point where they'll allow a dog on the editorial board, and this dog is doing the reviews. By the way, Ollie still contacts me regularly to tell me about her career, which I love.
It's kind of frightening as well when we think about the reality that we're in today, where it used to be, in my mind, there were communities of people or individuals who would spread misinformation, disinformation online. But now we have people in power doing it. And that to me is perhaps this line I was hoping that we would never cross. And yet here we are, where they're weaponizing the truth. What do you make of that?
It's absolutely horrifying. Amber, as you know, I've been working in this space for decades. And, in the past, a lot of my colleagues would say, oh, that's kind of a fun research topic, looking at misinformation. It's, esoteric, and you get to talk about pop culture and it's jade vagina eggs, being sold by Gwyneth Paltrow. We've gone from jade vagina eggs, right, to the destruction of knowledge. We have leaders around the world saying things that are demonstrably false. This misinformation has been completely normalized. There's been this idea that all knowledge is relevant, anything goes. And it is horrifying. It is absolutely horrifying. But I think it's, and I make this point in the book, we have to remember this is kind of the legacy of tolerating and kind of laughing at misinformation in the past. And here we are, where these misinformation narratives have become dominant themes in public discourse, but also in the context of policy. So yeah, it's absolutely horrifying.
How optimistic are you? Because I know as we get to the end of the book, you start to talk a little bit more about what we can do. So I don't want to give the whole book away, because I want people to go out and buy it and read it. But I would love to just know, where do you find any optimism at all in this environment?
Well, I do think this is a generational problem. This isn't going to go away tomorrow. There's going to be no quick fix, obviously, right? Obviously. But the good news is, and there is some good news, we are learning more and more about how to fight misinformation. And, I am a little bit worried that, especially in the United States, there are efforts to stop that research from happening. But despite that, we are learning more and more. Even since I finished writing the book, we've seen these big, well done, robust studies on misinformation. And that's good news. We're seeing this topic being taken more and more seriously. Very recently, the Global Risk Assessment ranked the spread of misinformation as the number one threat to humanity. Number one, Amber, the stuff we're talking about right now. And I agree with that. And we're also seeing, entities like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, et cetera, take this topic very seriously. All that is really good. It may sound like it's bad news, but it's not, right? Because we're seeing this mobilization against it. The other bit of good news, and I think this touches on your world quite a bit, is we're seeing these great young diverse voices speak up, right? We're starting to see all these great content creators from the different communities making very creative, science-focused content that really is pushing back against the noise. And I love that, because that's how we're going to fight this, right? With good, accurate content. And if I might, I think this is really important to highlight. Even the idea of misinformation fighting misinformation has become subject to misinformation. And people suggest that it's about censorship and cancel culture and silencing. Kind of on the contrary. Most tools that you use to fight misinformation, they happen within the marketplace of ideas, right? It's about critical thinking and pre-bunking and debunking and using nudges to allow people to find the good information that is out there. It's not about silencing. It's about using strategies that fit within the norms of freedom of expression. And kind of on the people who are against fighting misinformation are trying to silence those efforts, which is, again, yet another paradox.
I do see a big opportunity here in terms of people, like you say, whether it's content creators or journalists or people who are just fierce about the truth, about actually kind of flooding the zone, so to speak, with all of that content, right? And to me, one of the things I worry a little bit about is that even for people who are trying to spread the truth and facts, it is very hard sometimes for people to communicate clearly. And I speak about this a little bit in my keynotes, but one of the things that I really struggle with, especially if we look at the past little while with the tariffs between Canada and the US, is it maybe took me 10 minutes to dig up information on the flow of things like fentanyl and illegal guns and illegal immigration. And very quickly, I found 3 stats, which kind of told a better picture than anything that I had read in pretty much any newspaper or in any tweet or post online. So what can we do to communicate more clearly and effectively, and how important is that?
Yeah, I really think it's crucially important, and I think your point is excellent because when that and this tariff thing's not going away, you can talk about also the immigration rhetoric that we hear from the United States. All of that stuff, a lot of the stuff we're seeing in headlines is based on misinformation, right? It doesn't reflect the reality of what's going on, and I get disappointed when that happens. That the misinformation part of the controversy isn't highlighted enough, right? Are immigrants causing, a crime wave in the United States? No, there's no evidence to support that at all. Actually, I'm sure you know this, Amber, it's on the contrary. So I do think we need to do a better job being clear about what the evidence actually says. It's not easy because often there's a lot of uncertainty, right? And we have to be honest about that uncertainty too. But just because it's hard, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I think that is an invitation to collaborate with creatives, right? With artists, with graphic artists, with other kinds of researchers in order to make that content, to make the content that is accurate, but also engaging. It can be done and it must be done.
I think it is a great final point. Just one last question for you, because I think when you mention times of uncertainty, I can kind of understand why people want to latch on to certainty, the title of your book, because we want to feel safe, we want to feel comfortable. People don't like things that aren't certain. When we look forward for that individual who's watching this right now, maybe they're not a science communicator, maybe they're not a communications professional, what can that individual do to ensure that they don't fall victim potentially to some of this misinformation, disinformation, or just fraudulent material that is so prevalent online?
Well, in the book, as you know, I make recommendations for system change, but I also suggest, things that individuals can do. And one of my favorite examples is this idea of the pause, the power of the pause. It sounds like ridiculously straightforward, but there is a growing body of evidence that tells us that if we just pause for a moment, so this is research that has been replicated by, a number of laboratories around the world. If you just pause for a moment before you sort of internalize a headline or a meme on social media, you're less likely to believe misinformation, less likely to spread it. And it makes sense because it sort of decouples that emotional response. So much of what we see online plays to our emotions, our fears, our grievances. It kind of decouples that and invites us to think about accuracy. So even that little step, Amber, can make a difference. And then, of course, you always want to ask yourself, what kind of evidence is being used? Is this an anecdote? Is this just one person's opinion? What's the body of evidence say on these topics? And I think even just reflecting on those things, almost as much as, finding out what the evidence actually says, but just reflecting on what the evidence might be does a lot of the heavy lifting and really nudges all of us in the right direction.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I do, again, want to just shout out your book, The Certainty Illusion. I want to say, because a lot of people are looking to buy Canadian and looking to shop local. So I found this in my local bookstore, Queen Books, down on Queen Street East. So I was super happy to see it there. For people who want to get your book, where's the best place for them to go?
Anywhere. It's available throughout Canada and all the online outfits. But yeah, let's buy Canadian and let's make sure that we all can continue to fight the good fight. Go science.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me, Tim.
Thank you, Amber.
Thanks, Amber and Tim. Coming up after the break, we chat about the future of news and Canadian pride.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome back to the Amber Mac Show. Jeff, with the rise of misinformation and disinformation, I think it's fair to say that local news matters more now than ever.
Absolutely. And I know you're going to take a look at what's happening on the local news front in Toronto with your interview with one of the leaders of a small community paper located in the Greater Toronto Area.
News matters.
I am so excited to sit down with Melanie Morassutti, who is executive editor of the West End Phoenix. Thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here, Amber.
Tell me a little bit about the origin story of your paper.
Okay, so I guess the heart of it is sort of belongs to David Deeney, our publisher. He had traveled to Yellowknife and embedded himself in their local paper with the aim of writing a book about it. And he quickly found that organization was sort of one of the beating hearts of their community. And when he came back to Toronto and to the West End where he lives, he asked, why can't we have one of these too? Something that holds up a mirror to this place that we love.
I think it's fair to say, as someone who's originally from Prince Edward Island, I'm very familiar with the importance of local and community newspapers. But sometimes in a larger city like Toronto, people don't necessarily think that there are these local papers serving these communities. It was really a different time then in 2017, I think, in the media world. What was the reaction when you started this paper from the community?
Oh, it's funny. Everybody said, "Are you crazy?" And, we sort of love, in a way, yes. The answer was yes. Yes, we are crazy, but we thought we would just give it a try. And I think what spurred us onward, even though that was a tough time for media. I think you could ask any journalist at any paper, in 2015, 16, 17, what it was like. And people were doing triple jobs. This was like the time of digital news desks, 24/7 news cycle, reduced advertising revenues and atrophying editorial teams. So it was a tough time. And when he asked me if I wanted to do this, I said, no, like absolutely not. It was the existential cry. But we decided that we would try and do it very differently in a sort of a countercultural way.
What does that mean exactly to do it differently? Because I think you're right. At that time, there was lots happening in the media world. So how do you do that differently?
Right. Well, I think the joke at the beginning was that we would sort of start off where everybody was ending up, which was nonprofit. So we decided that we would be a nonprofit entity, a print-only paper. Our motto from the early days was slow print for fast times, so that we would sort of resist the pressures of the churning daily cycle and tell stories with a little bit more enduring impact, with a much longer shelf life and sort of enduring impact to the people who they were about.
There are lots of community newspapers across the country. We'll talk a little bit more about the state of some of those papers today in 2025. But in those early days, I was reading that you had Prime Minister Justin Trudeau who came for a visit. You have lots of high-profile names like Margaret Atwood who've been published in your paper. How are you able, as such a small paper, to attract really what is a much bigger lens?
Yeah, well, it helps that our publisher has had a public profile. So he's a writer and a musician, and so and also very, very good at asking for things and getting yeses in return. And so he was able, in his sort of big-hearted way, to rally people with some profile around the project, and it helped us get quite a number of subscribers before we launched.
So, like you said, it was a difficult time back in 2017, but I would argue there was still an appetite and maybe more respect for news in the sense that that's kind of changed over the past few years. I think what we've seen, especially out of the pandemic, is that journalism has been under attack from various sources. How have you been able to weather some of those more difficult times?
Well, I think what's maybe at the heart of that is we came about a year into the operation, maybe 2 years, and we started to realize that instead of just being a newspaper, we were a community organization that happened to publish a newspaper. And I think that's sort of the answer lies in that. We were something that our neighborhoods we're rallying around. We host live events. We gave people a lot of opportunities to come together. People know us, like our readers know us. We have a team of 100 volunteer deliverers who go door to door and deliver routes across West End Phoenix routes across the city. So there are a lot of touch points. Like this is an entity that brings people together in real time. So we're not just a generic disembodied media. We are the people in their little office at 3 Bartlett Avenue, for a while in a little office on the second floor of the Gladstone Hotel, who you could knock on the door and talk to. So we were people.
So I would argue that probably that has been something that has helped largely with the success, right? Is really understanding how to embed yourself in community. Is that fair to say?
That's the word. Yeah, for sure.
And so when we look at the state of local news right now, I was just pulling up a recent report from the Local News Research Project. They documented the disappearance of 519 local news outlets across the country from 2008 to April of 2024. Some of these, of course, might be larger local newspapers. Some of them might be smaller. Do you feel any pressure from a stat like that in knowing that things are perhaps more difficult today?
I don't. When I think about the future of local news, like the word that comes to me is coalition. I do see how many vital news organizations there are across the country, even in our own city. And I think linking arms is going to be sort of the solution for us going forward. There are already advocacy groups that work on the policy piece and making sure that government policy at various levels is strengthening our industry. But I think there's an opportunity for different kinds of alliances, like groups of papers who do similar things, banding together to share resources, to share operational support, to share a sales guy, to share, you know what I mean? If there's an investigative piece that you'd like to assign, but it's going to take a year to produce and you don't have the budget for it, what if you combine forces? These experiments are happening. I would call them innovations happening at other papers, where smaller players and larger players are getting together and sort of partnering on projects. And I think that's sort of the future. So when I see other papers falling, I feel like it's just there is no time like now to sort of be linking arms.
That is a very optimistic way to look at present day right now in terms of local news. What about that pressure to go digital? Because I know you've been publishing for a few years. Like you said, it is a print publication, but we are also in a time where everybody's launching podcasts, they're doing video. Do you ever think that is in the future of what you do, or are you going to stick closely to the roots of what you've been doing?
It's not in our future. No, we're sticking with our roots. In fact, if anything, it feels more like a very thrilling form of resistance to be doing it this way, to not be dependent on a digital means of production and dissemination. Feels very freeing. So I would say no.
I really like what you say in terms of it being a form of resistance, because as much as I love digital and quite frankly, most of my career has been based on creating content in the digital space, there are so many issues with that, in the sense that you tend to be kind of fast and furious, or as some of the tech giants would say, move fast and break things, right? There is something about print as a medium that you get the feeling that there was just more time and energy spent on thinking of what words went to paper. Am I alone in that thinking?
Yeah, no. And I mean, go fast and break things. It's like, that's a heart-shattering concept to me. I couldn't disagree with it more. Like, I think the way of the future, or the way of a proper civic approach, is go slow and go with great care. You know what I mean? So print allows us to do that. Build relationships, take care, go slowly, and be careful.
We were talking a little bit before we sat down that Toronto is like 100 different communities. And so I'm not as familiar with your community. I live in a different part of the city. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the connection you have to the community members who see the paper as such an important resource in that community.
Right. Well, because we hold so many community events, and because we have this large volunteer force that descends on our office once a month, several times a year, to distribute the paper, I think the people in our community of readers, feel like they're a part of something bigger. They buy tickets to rock shows that we host in parking lots. They come to our moose hide stretching workshop. They come to poetry nights. So they're getting their paper and they're reading their paper and they're clipping things out of their paper, but they're also participating. We do voting socials. So in the last municipal elections, we had a bunch of readers come, hang out at the office for a little while. We ate pizza, and then a brass band came and played us to the polling station. So like the sousaphone was there, and it's not just it's not just something that you're reading at home alone with your door closed, but something that you're doing out in your neighborhood with your neighbors.
I think you're right in that. I mean, it feels a little bit different than maybe some of the community papers I've seen in terms of that connection to community, to culture, to the arts. I know when I was doing some research that you even have a short little song.
We have a jingle.
Which is very cool.
West End Phoenix is setting the town on fire. West End Phoenix, it's coming door to door. West End Phoenix.
I don't know if you feel this sort of connection now more than ever to sort of the truth when there is this rise in misinformation and disinformation in the world, but does it feel like your mission at this paper is even stronger in light of the fact that there is this sort of deterioration of what people believe is the truth?
Yeah, well, it's polarizing, and I think it also gives me more of a commitment to doing the work that I do. We know that local news readers are civically more engaged. We know that local news readers tend to vote more, tend to volunteer in their communities more. And we know that national news can be polarizing. So a great way to bring people together is around the stories that affect them most.
I almost feel when I'm chatting with you, I think about my son who's 15 years old, and I see among his friends kind of this return to analog, right?
Yep.
And I think
record albums,
right? Maybe the pendulum is sort of swinging back to this time where we want print, we want the record albums, we want things that we can touch and feel. So that feels like that could be a good thing, I think, in the world of information and news.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a little bit of a sense of trust there. You know what you're getting. You know where it came from. You know that it can't be screwed with after it's left your hands, So I do think that the analog form in the beginnings, we saw it as a respite from being on our screens and being on our phones. But now it does also feel like a protection.
One of the things that we're trying to do through this series of News Matters is just sort of investigate how some of these organizations, different sizes, when it comes to news media, are staying afloat. You mentioned you're a nonprofit. What do you see as kind of the business model going forward for some of these smaller community papers? Yeah,
well, for us, I can only speak for us, and it has been our rather diversified revenue streams have really helped us. So at the beginning, we just assumed we would sell subscriptions and that would be the whole story. But now we are selling subscriptions. We have donors and patrons. We have ad sales. We were sort of like pluckily ad free at the beginning, but then our local business owners were writing and asking if they could place an ad, and the readers didn't mind at all. So there's ads, there's events, which I mentioned, and there's partnerships with a whole range of community organizations and philanthropic entities that have also been really, really good for us.
What does your day-to-day look like in the role that you have? Since you mentioned you have all of these different avenues that you're pursuing, I imagine it's quite diverse.
Yes, I mean we do have an HQ. Our headquarters are on Bartlett Avenue, just east of Dufferin and Bloor. So our team meets there several times a week. We do editorial meetings there. We have our social and communications meetings there. Mostly we are siloed at our kitchen tables, and we're producing the paper remotely. It's all about talking to writers and photographers, casting, assigning stories, working with the art department. And then, of course, it's kind of like picking raspberries. Making a print paper that's going to have a shelf life it's a really hand-hewn thing. And so there is a lot of time that goes into the making, which is kind of a delight. It sort of feels like the old heyday of magazines where we're sort of poring over layouts and, sound engineering stories. And it's quite a delight.
One final question for you in terms of how people can support local news or their community papers, because I know there are a lot of people out there thinking, you know what, I love my community paper. What can I do to support it? Or maybe they didn't even know they had a community paper.
Mhm.
What's that first step or couple of steps that people can take?
Yes. Well, I mean, there's nothing like buying a subscription. That definitely keeps the lights on and it does keep the presses rolling. But you can also send in the words for your classified. You can volunteer and have a route. You can come to an event. There are lots of ways you can tell your friends about the paper, and you can get a lawn sign. We have beautiful little pink lawn signs that are sort of like the West End Phoenix version of a billboard, and they're scattered throughout the West End and other parts of the city. So there are lots of ways to show that you support the news.
Maybe even start their own paper if one doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
You would recommend that?
I'm not stopping anyone.
I love it. Well, listen, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thanks so much, Amber. It was great.
We'll be doing more News Matters segments in future shows. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Don Kerr, who wrote and recorded the West End Phoenix jingle that you heard in that interview. Jeff, we always have to give credit to the music people. I think you would appreciate that.
Absolutely. I absolutely take that as a good thing personally, as somebody who writes music themselves. And I know, lots of people across the country are now talking about buying local in reaction to the all of the Trump machinations. So let's hear what CIRA has to say about what small businesses can do to promote Canadian pride.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167. Talking Tech.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. Over the past few weeks, there has been a lot of talk and news about buying Canadian in the face of U.S. tariffs. To chat more about this, joining me now is Adam Eisner, who is Vice President .ca and Registry Services at CIRA. Hi there.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get into a conversation about Canadian pride and buying Canadian, for people who aren't familiar with CIRA, what is it that you do?
Sure. So CIRA is an acronym for the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, and we are the stewards of the .ca domain extension. And so my job and my universe is largely about managing and growing .ca in Canada.
I think it's fair to say that we have seen a lot of Canadian pride so far in 2025. Can you talk a little bit more about this surge in Canadian pride and .ca with the impact of recent tariffs?
Well, it's definitely an emerging and live issue. And what we're hearing from Canadians really is that they want to support Canadian businesses. And, .ca has always done that. We champion small businesses in Canada, and we're going to continue to do so through this. So we've been saying, since all .ca owners need to have a local Canadian presence, if you're looking to shop local through this and support Canadian businesses, then look for the .ca domain extension.
I have been lucky enough to have a .ca domain for a long time, so I am very familiar with the benefits to small business owners as one myself. But can you talk a little bit more about why a .ca is beneficial to Canadian small business owners?
Sure. Well, first, there's more than 3.4 million .cas on the internet now. So anyone who shops online is likely interacting with a .ca every day or in some way. So a small business using a .ca really immediately joins kind of a growing and vibrant community of internet users, internet businesses. They also get the benefit of a web address that's proven to be really effective. We do a lot of research on this. So, for example, we know through our research that Canadians are 4 times more likely to click on a .ca over a .com when they're looking for products and services online. And we know that 7 of 10 Canadians prefer shopping online with a Canadian business over an international one. So, .ca is a great fit in both cases. And kind of beyond that with a .ca, a small business, a lot of us do this, can build a completely personalized presence using a branded web address, a branded email address to really make their online presence more visible. So people know that they're interacting with a Canadian business with a real Canadian brand.
One thing I think that people will be excited to learn about is just how CIRA reinvests when Canadians buy a .ca domain.
Yeah, a great deal of it, a great deal of our investment goes back into what we would kind of call infrastructure. So there's a lot of work in making sure that .ca remains safe and stable and secure. We kind of call it plumbing. There's a lot of work in the plumbing to make sure that when you type a .ca domain into your browser, that you end up arriving where you need to be. But aside from that infrastructure and plumbing stuff, we also have a grants program where we fund community-led internet projects to build a better and more resilient and trusted internet in Canada. So we have grants that go to all sorts of initiatives every year, from online safety to students to supporting rural communities. Last year in 2024, we funded 15 different initiatives, actually. So it's really great to be able to give back to the community as well.
One thing I notice when I post about .ca is that Canadians tend to talk about trust and credibility, and we've certainly touched on that in this interview so far. In your own words, could you talk a little bit more about that consumer trust factor insofar as the decision for businesses to register a .ca domain?
Yeah, first and foremost, you have to have a connection to Canada, whether you're a citizen, permanent resident, a corporation, or, there's a real large number of categories. And so I think that's a big reason why .ca has become such a popular choice for Canadian businesses and individuals. Only those with a Canadian connection can purchase one. So that really instills a lot of credibility with shoppers and business owners. But on top of that, a lot of people don't realize .ca is actually recognized as one of the most safe domain extensions on the internet. So what I mean by that is kind of low instances of what we would call abuse, things like fraud and things like spam. So because there's lower sort of amounts of that, that when you're dealing with a .ca domain, you can be assured that there's like this additional element of safety as well.
I think in 2025, that is top of mind for many small business owners as well. So just finally, when we look forward in 2025 and beyond, can you talk further about how CIRA and .ca is supporting Canadian small businesses?
We try to support small businesses wherever we can. Whether that's, for example, we publish these gift guides throughout the year where we only highlight Canadian businesses using .ca domains. You can actually see those at CIRA.ca, and they're pretty fun. Whether it's, we'll do a wellness gift guide, we'll do a pet gift guide, a foodie gift guide, you name it. Only .ca businesses. I've bought a bunch of stuff there myself. We also do CA success story videos. We publish those at ownyoursuccess.ca, so you can really get to know local Canadian businesses and how they're using their .ca domain names in their everyday businesses. We also have a number of cybersecurity products and toolkits, so helping small businesses understand and get cyber safe on the internet. And then we also have a service called Canadian Shield, really aims to protect individuals and businesses when they are online. So lots of different ways that we try and help support Canadian businesses of all types.
Absolutely. And just a little plug for Canadian Shield. I just did an Instagram reel about Canadian Shield, so people can check that out over on my Instagram account. Adam, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're going to be busy in the weeks and months ahead, so really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, that's it for our first episode. Coming up in the future, I'll be looking forward to doing some more segments with some gadget reviews, some science stuff, some tech culture, and more.
Absolutely. Cannot wait. We have lots in store. So thank you so much for listening to the first episode of The Amber Mack Show, and we will see you next week.
You're listening to The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.